Hey everyone, it is August 8, 2012. I'm Rene Ritchie, and today we're going to talk about Apple being doomed again, or maybe not. We're also going to talk about some security snafus and the anniversary of the Newton message pad. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, you have too many titles. I got to try and remember them all now. The managing editor of iMore, the executive editor of The Loop, Peter Cohen, a.k.a. Flark. How are you, sir?
Yeah, me and John Carmack, man.
Oh, yeah, so let's dive right into that. John Carmack, who people might know from such things as Doom, what is he doing now? He's got a side job? He's got a second job?
Yeah, well, let's see. Back in 2000, he started Armadillo Aerospace, so I guess technically this is his third job. Oh. But he remains technical director at id Software. He's, of course, the stunning mentat who is just a genius in the 3D world and created the original Doom, Doom 3, Quake. He's behind the Rage. He's behind the 3D engine technology that id Software uses and licenses out to many other game developers.
Oh, and by the way, he made a couple iOS apps in his spare time.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, he and his wife went on vacation, and they realized how crappy mobile games were. And he said, you know what, I'm going to program a few, and ended up doing quite a few of them. So this week, or I should say this week, they, meaning Oculus VR, the company behind the Oculus Rift 3D goggles, announced that Carmack was joining them as CTO. And Bethesda, which owns id, made a point of saying this isn't affecting his day-to-day work at id. This is something that he's doing on the side as well.
In his spare time, like we might bake muffins.
Right, exactly, in his spare time. But, it's interesting because Carmack was a really early adopter of the Rift, and he was a really big evangelist of the technology, too. He showed an early build of Doom BFG Edition running on a Rift last year, long before anybody else had their hands on one. So he's, I think, been instrumental in getting the word out about the technology and getting developers excited. So it looks like it's going to be a really good match between Oculus and him.
Yeah, I've seen the Oculus Rift twice now, once at CES and once at GDC, and I have this problem that my vision is pathetic. I need these glasses, and I believe that most of it was lost on me, but I saw a lot of people, one after the other, they would get to the part of the demo where snowflakes start to fall, and seasoned, hardened, unimaginative, boring tech reporter after tech reporter would just look up into the sky in amazement as these things came down around them.
Well, I have to admit, I have not seen the Rift in person, so maybe it's just kind of lost on me. But I haven't really been excited about it. But then last week, I saw a tech demo. This Australian developer had done a demo of a game that he was working on for the Rift that recognized your body position in addition to your head movement. So he was doing things like ducking behind boxes, and peering around boxes to shoot at the bad guys and stuff like that. That looked fantastically fun, and he said that the problem is that people kept reaching out, people who would try it out would keep reaching out for the objects that they were seeing, like to get leverage on a box or whatever, and then the box wouldn't be there, and they'd go ass over tea kettle. So we're getting just that much closer to the holodeck experience that I think, every Trek nerd wants.
That bastard Guy English told me we'll never have holodecks, and the best we can hope for is things like VR helmets.
I don't know why Guy English has to, hate on our fantasies. That's just mean.
I know. It's probably exactly right, but I'm not going to believe him anyway. The thing that I made, because there's such a problem with 3D technology in general. For nature just didn't evolve us to focus and converge on the same. It did evolve us to focus and converge on the same plane, and that's not how it works either on a 3D movie where you have a flat screen but objects are made to appear further back or closer, or a lot of people who have problems playing 3D video games just because they start to get disoriented, they get vertigo playing them, and I think that's the challenge with Oculus Rift, is to get over the latency involved in it and to make it a close enough experience that it's not uncanny, it's not nauseating, and it's not fake looking, but it actually starts to become something that our brains just accept like normal life.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing about the promise of 3D since the mid-'80s when Jaron Lanier was sort of the golden boy of the VR movement. And it seemed real cool at the time, but the problem was the technology was really in its infancy, and we certainly didn't have the computing horsepower that we take for granted nowadays. And we're getting closer. We're undoubtedly getting closer with each iteration of this technology. I personally don't know if the Oculus Rift is it. I still have my doubts that consumers, mainstream consumers, who could really push this into a big deal, are going to be comfortable having this heavy thing strapped to their face. And in fact, their whole head. I mean, it goes around your head, it goes over your head. It's a big piece of hardware to wear. But from the perspective of gamers, I think it's really cool technology, and it's going to be interesting to watch. They're not planning on having a consumer edition of this thing out until next year. The only people who have one are the folks who ordered it on Kickstarter and paid $300 or more to be part of their developer seed. And they're actually still, I think, taking pre-orders for the developer unit from their website. So the people who are doing this, though, are very, very early adopters, bleeding-edge types who are developers and who want to make this technology work for their own games.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely true, and those of us who had Trios back in the day can tell you that they are to what modern smartphone is, which we hope that all these new technologies will be. But I don't know, even if you shrink it down to like a Scott Summers Cyclops band or a Geordie LaForge band across your eyes, it still kind of cuts you off from real reality, because part of the joy for me when I play Halo is, for example, watching Georgia or her husband's head atomize into a bright red cloud as I run by in Halo snickering. And it's not just seeing it on the screen, but it's looking over at their distraught faces as I atomize their characters that makes it a social experience. And if all of us were wearing VR helmets and we looked around, I think we would lose that sort of social gaming, trash-talking, joyful nature of it all.
I think that there's that aspect to it for sure, and I also think that it will really depend on the game as well. I mean, I can see it for first-person shooters. I can see it for maybe even third-person shooters and racing games. I think it'll be a natural for. But there are a lot of other games out there that it's just not going to be well suited for. The interesting thing is that the guy who created the Oculus Rift itself seems convinced that the technology is going to scale to mobile within a few years. So who knows? Maybe when the iPhone 6 comes out, or maybe when the iPhone 7 comes out, we'll be able to buy an Oculus Rift headset and VR ourselves into ridiculousness on the train ride to work in the morning.
Well, part of me sympathizes. If I could go into these in airplanes, both of us have to travel for work, and modern air travel can be arduous. But if I could get into the plane, put on my visor, plug it into my iPhone or iPad, and just that entire plane disappears, all the screaming, entitled people disappear, all the noise and noxiousness disappears, and suddenly I'm wandering through Mario Land. I don't know if I'll be adverse to that.
Right, exactly. Or maybe you can do like a business class or a first class game where you have a much more spacious seat and easier legroom than you deal with in coach. No, that's definitely true. And it's funny. This isn't the first time that we've even seen this stuff on the Apple portable platform. I remember a few years ago there was a company called MyView that actually had these headsets that you could wear, these eyeglasses that you could wear that would project whatever was on your iPod onto the inside of the visors. It wasn't stereoscopic, of course, and didn't provide you with the same level of immersion or realism that you get with the Oculus Rift. But still, it was a way to privately watch video. So, if you want to watch whatever you want to watch without somebody peering over your shoulder, you could do it. We've seen this technology pop up over and over again, and it's just a matter of the right confluence of technology, consumer interest, price point, and industry support before it just explodes into something major.
And as with all audiovisual technology, whatever the porn industry gets behind will become successful in the long run.
That too. I mean, you can count on it. Teledildonics, man, it's the way to the future.
Always, always aware of the future. Well, I'm happy that John Carmack got his second job so he can suit his new McDonald's budget.
That's right.
One of the things that's interesting to me about too is that Apple is doing not 3D, but they're doing this thing called depth on iOS 7, where it reminds me of those old Amiga games when they had parallax scrolling. But because they have the all the sensors, the gyroscope, the accelerometer, they can actually move the layers in response to the real world, which means when you shift the phone around, you can start things move enough that you can start to see what's behind them, and that to me is a more interesting effect than some of the 3D that I've seen, for movies and stuff.
Well, and that's just it. It adds another layer of immersion into the iOS interface that we haven't seen before. And I mean, the parallax effect of the iPhone's background, its desktop, was something that caught the eye of a lot of developers at WWDC. And I remember actually we interviewed one for iMore who had already programmed it into his game. So, when you tilted it back and forth, you got some parallax effect. So that's something that I think we're going to be seeing developers use and probably abuse in the coming months. But, it is what it is. It'll find its way into the ecosystem pretty effectively, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the key. As long as it's done subtly and it's done as an enhancement and not as something that's supposed to grab your attention, but just, for example, on iOS 7, you could sort of peek a little bit and just see almost what's behind something, or you just get that little moment of delight. And I think if it's not distracting but is just a general enhancement of the environment, that's when people become happy with it and not upset by it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I would agree.
I don't know if that's going to come to the Mac though, Peter. I don't know if we need that sort of environment. Well, first of all, you're not going to be tilting your MacBook around, but I don't know if that.
No, absolutely not. I don't think we need it either. But I always enjoy it when I get a game that's got some good parallax scrolling, because it takes me right back to those Amiga days. I dabbled with the Amiga in college, so.
You were Amiga curious in college.
I was indeed, and it was a hell of a game or a hell of a platform for games.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was Pangea was one of the bigger developers, and I quite adored a lot of the stuff. The UK always got the better games. It was one of those reversals of fortune that now exists. But
well, Psygnosis, man, that was
yes.
that was their bread and butter. All those games.
Memories. One of the stories that caught my attention this week. It was published in All Things D, and I forget the name of the company, but I'll just bring it up here. But there was a study that said that Apple. Or the iPhone, rather, is not chosen by as many first adapters as it is chosen by people who are buying their second or subsequent handsets. I think the metrics were something like 30% as opposed to 50%. And what interested me first was what the coverage was. I mean, some headlines were Apple not a hit with first-time smartphone buyers, and other headlines were, Apple's a hit with, multiple-time smartphone buyers, and that sort of encapsulated this whole Apple is doomed versus Apple is winning mentality to me, where I don't know. Well, first let me concentrate on that. It seems like a lot of times the metrics are not useful without context, yet the metric companies do not provide any, and then it falls on media people who are not well trained in metrics to sort of do that, and we often do it badly.
Well, I'm reminded of Disraeli's quotes about lies, damn lies, and statistics. The problem with the way the whole thing works is that you can interpret that stuff any way that you want. When you're not just interpreting data, you're interpreting it as a sociological trend. And the difference between being able to do that well and do it not well is a huge gap. And this is another practical example of it. My whole takeaway from that was basically fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, can't get fooled again. It was a clear indication that people are buying smartphones, are upgrading to smartphones in many cases from feature phones for the first time in their lives. They get a crappy Android phone and they get burned by it, and they're just not happy with it, and they end up with an iPhone the second time around. That just intuitively makes sense to me, but I admit my bias. I'm an Apple person through and through.
Yeah, first of all, the study was by Consumer Intelligence Research Partners, and the figures were 50% of previous owners buy an iPhone, while under one-third of first-time owners buy an iPhone. And I don't think you're wrong, and I don't think you're biased either, because I think the original people like you and I who bought smartphones, we're early adopters. price is often not the primary feature to us. We want certain things from a smartphone, and then we'll pay whatever we feel is reasonable to get them. But the next billion smartphone customers, the people who are exactly, as you said, moving from feature phones, they just want the next free phone. They'll go into their carrier, and they would, they've had a candy bar phone or a flip phone, and now smartphones are free, and they'll just take the next smartphone because, hey, I can, use Facebook on it or whatever, and I can surf the web, whatever features they use. And they really are, for them, cheapness is the absolute top feature on their list. And they end up getting an Android phone they don't like or something else only because Apple doesn't compete on the cheap end yet. I don't think they're buying high-end Android phones like the G4 or the GS4, the G4, the HTC One either. I think they're going for whatever is cheaper, and there just happens to be cheaper options like that.
I think you also have to take the numbers into context as well. If I remember Ina Fried's coverage correctly, she said that, or she quoted the research firm that had published these numbers as saying that a little less than 1/3 of first-time smartphone buyers were iPhone buyers. Well, if you take a look at the smartphone market in general, that's a pretty respectable percentage for one company with one product to have. Yeah. Because Apple's market share for first-time smartphone buyers exceeded Samsung's, exceeded HTC's, exceeded LG's. It's only when you combine those that you get a bigger number than Apple's share. So Apple still has won a lot of hearts and minds, even among first-time buyers.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And then when you look at the difference between that 30% and that 50%, it looks like people are switching to the iPhone. If they have not bought the iPhone first, when they're going back to upgrade, more people are buying the iPhone than they did previously. And I think that speaks well for Apple with repeat buyers. And then that sort of suggests that if the iPhone 5C rumors are true and Apple comes out with a less expensive option, then maybe people in emerging markets or first-time buyers who want to buy postpaid and not who want to get on-contract rather than on-contract devices will have another option to consider.
I think you're absolutely right. My feeling on the 5C is that it's a device that's meant to broaden Apple's appeal in the first world markets where Apple already competes. It's not really a device that's going to get people in India or the billion folks in China who can't afford an iPhone, or people in Africa. I don't necessarily see it as a huge market opportunity for that, but there's still a lot of people in the United States and in Europe who are, and South America as well, who are driven by price pressure and want a phone that has a lot of capabilities but don't want to pay a lot of money for it. Otherwise you wouldn't see companies in the United States like AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile trying to make a grab at used cell phones like they are by offering these upgrade programs that make you turn your old phone in. They want to be able to turn over that used product market. That's a very, very lucrative market for them.
Yeah, it's interesting to me too because I don't know the right way to phrase this, but Apple is very confident in their focus on the market. They never feel the need to be all products to all people. We saw that when they didn't do netbooks, and we saw that again when they took the iPhone screen to 4 inches. They could theoretically make every size of screen the same way Samsung does. They could theoretically make every price range the way Nokia does, but they only make products that move that needle slightly. So if they could go from 50% of the addressable market to 75% of the addressable market with a very small product portfolio, they're fine with that. And I kind of like the fact that they don't feel the need to make products only because they have to fill certain slots.
Yeah, exactly. And we've talked about this on the show before, and I think we've probably written about it until our fingers were bleeding as well. But the sense from a lot of from analysts and industry quote-unquote experts that Apple has to compete, or Apple's losing out on this revenue opportunity, and we've seen them walk away from what looks like opportunity time and time again, only to be proven right. I'm talking about things like netbooks, for example, or in the 90s it was the mid-tower model, that they didn't have, that, or not the 90s, but the early aughts, the mid-tower model that they didn't have, that everybody said was leaving money on the table, and Apple was like, whatever, we're going to build what we build. Um, you know, Apple has a very clear sense of mission and a very clear sense of who its customer is and what they want to be able to provide to them. And I think that doing any kind of armchair quarterbacking or second guessing of Apple's philosophy towards selling to those customers is a losing battle. I don't think that it's something that you can reasonably do.
Yeah, and you wrote an excellent piece, I think it was yesterday, on the Message Pad. It's the anniversary of the Message Pad, and that product was beloved by geeks, and Steve Jobs, when he came back to Apple, threw it in the backseat of a car, drove it out to the desert, and buried it. And that arguably became a good market for Palm and a good market for Windows Mobile, and something Apple did not really re-enter until, was it a decade or two later?
Yeah, indeed. I think that they're buried in the desert someplace right next to a bunch of ET cartridges for the Atari 2600. It's really kind of a shame because it was a great machine, and it was hampered by a lot of technological problems, right? I mean, let's not understate it. The Newton was not necessarily stillborn, but it was cut off at the knees because the early versions of the Newton, and I'm talking about everything, all the message pads up until the message pads started shipping with Newton OS 2.0, which was about 2.5, I think, years later after the original Newton message pad came out, were hampered with really miserable handwriting technology. Once Apple had the Newton Message Pad 2100 out, that was the sweet spot. If you have a 2100, you've got a machine that still is to this day a usable PDA that can do some really cool things. It was fast. It had plenty of memory. It had beautiful handwriting recognition, and it was a really sophisticated piece of hardware. But it took Apple to that ultimate device because that was the last message pad before they had something that was really a rock-solid PDA. And then they had the eMate 300, which is my personal favorite. That was their little mini laptop that they made for the educational market that unfortunately really didn't catch on, but that was Newton-based as well. Very cool piece of kit. The whole project was killed unmercifully by Steve Jobs when he returned to Apple as interim CEO after Gil Amelio was unceremoniously shown the door. And Apple really wouldn't pick up the torch of handheld devices like that again for a decade until the iPhone came out. I mean, it was 1998 when they killed the message pad. It was 2007 before we saw the iPhone. Obviously, the iPhone was a very different implementation, but it was still the same kind of idea. And in that intervening decade, we had the rise and fall of Palm. Actually, not even the fall of Palm yet. We had the rise of Palm, and then we had Palm's entry into the smartphone market. Which was really kind of an interesting twist because, I mean, smartphones at that point were really niche products, right? I mean, you had Blackberries, and that was about it.
And you had Nokia, which people keep telling me started in 1812.
Right, exactly, Nokia. Which was great, I guess, for that market. But Nokia phones, to me, were always weird.
Yeah, they were hard to use and existed primarily so that people could make money off SMS messages.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So. Apple comes in with a very different idea, and one of Steve Jobs' criticisms of the Palm and other devices of the era was the stylus. It was the same thing that Apple had introduced with the message pad, and his point was, hey, look, I've got 10 styluses right on my hands here. I want to use these. Why should I use anything else? And in all honesty, he was right. I mean, there's still a market for styluses for some people to do specific things with their touch devices, but we've really moved beyond that point.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because, Steve Jobs was famous for that quadrant. He came in and he said, I want to have 4 products, and they're all computers. There's going to be consumer and professional, laptop and desktop, that's it. And Apple, in some ways, has stuck to that, although the candidates shift around and they have kind of fallen out of there a little bit. But if you look at it, there's the iPod Touch and the iPhone, the iPad Mini and the iPad, or you can condense it down and say the iPad line and the MacBook Air line, and that's sort of like their mobile portfolio. Even all these years, these decades later, it's still that highly focused product suite.
That's exactly right. And the iOS and Mac products obviously cater to very different segments. But there's an increasing amount of crossover. You know, we've been hearing about this halo effect for years, and it's a very real thing where people will buy an iPhone and then a year later they'll decide that they want to get an iPad because they're already familiar with the operating system, they've downloaded the apps, they're familiar with it, and then a year or two after that they're back in the stores looking for a Macintosh to replace their PC, which they've decided is too old, too crufty, or too malware-ridden to deal with. So, you know, I think Apple's made a very smart and very deliberate decision in the way that they sort of manage their product matrix.
It's almost like that classic business treatise, Crossing the Chasm, where you're supposed to identify one thing that can take off, and then you start annexing verticals next to it. And, you know, Apple struggled with the Mac for a long time. Not financially, they made a killing on a tiny market percentage share, but it wasn't the mainstream product I think that they always wanted to do with computing. And then the iPhone and iOS came along, and that became a huge success, and they very cleverly and carefully annexed the iPad to it on one side, the Mac to it on the other side, and now their whole it's bringing up their entire portfolio.
Yes, indeed.
One of the other things that I found interesting, at least, is Craig Hockenberry from the Icon Factory. He did a survey of developers to see iOS 7 is just on the horizon. It'll be out this fall, and like we mentioned, it's got a considerably different design language. It looks, once you spend time with it, I think it's gorgeous. You know, opinions will vary on that, but it looks profoundly different from iOS 6, and developers who don't update their apps are going to be left with apps that maybe look old and outdated to some of their customers. It'll look like the old, you know, the old broken instead of the new hotness. So Hockenberry did a survey of other developers. Now, granted, this survey will skew towards people who are aware of Craig Hockenberry, which tend to be the most devoted and, frankly, the best developers in iOS, and these are the same types of developers who will probably update their apps anyway. But the results of his impromptu survey was 95% are working on iOS 7 updates, and you know, we've seen a lot of numbers about the adoption rates of new iOS versions, and I think that sort of maps nicely to that.
Yeah, you know, the numbers gave me pause a little bit because one of the questions that he asked was, you know, about whether or not you were updating apps for iOS 7 and whether or not they were going to be backward compatible with iOS 6. And it seems like a lot of the developers that he was talking or that he received the information back from said no, that they're going to be making stuff for iOS 7 from here on out. Where I worry about that is that there, you know, remains a very large base of users who are not running the latest version of the operating system. I think in January, Apple revealed that like 300 million, or Tim Cook revealed like 300 million or so users, or maybe it was at All Things D, I can't remember, were already running iOS 6. And then Apple shortly thereafter announced that 500 million people were running or were using iOS devices. So, you know, that's 60%, and it's a huge number, but it's not everyone. Mm-hmm. And I know from my experience, and look, I'll be the first person to say that anecdote is not, you know, the plural of data, or is not the singular form of data, but my experience working in a store on the weekends is that, you know, we get people in all the time who are using iOS devices that are wildly out of date. I had a guy in the store a couple of weeks ago that had an original iPad that was running iOS 3, and he couldn't understand why this app that he was trying to download wouldn't download. Because, you know, his system just didn't meet the minimum system requirements. We upgraded him to iOS 5 point whatever, and he was off and running and quite happy. But you know, Apple and iOS developers run the very real risk of alienating a big group of users by forcing their hand to go to iOS 7. And it may give some of them an opportunity to take a look at what they're doing and say, hey, look, I'm near the end of my contract, or, you know, if I jump into one of these new upgrade programs, I can get a new phone. Maybe it's time for me to think about going somewhere else besides iOS. Maybe I should go with a smartphone from Samsung or LG, or, you know, try out a Windows Lumia phone. I don't know. You know, it could be an opportunity for people to kind of reassess what they're doing and make a different decision if it's going to be really jarring for them. I realize that that's not an excuse to stop innovating, and you know, I think that a lot of people will upgrade to iOS 7, but I would caution developers to not make decisions hastily about who they want their audience to be, because, you know, if you're expecting 500 million people to be able to use your app, you've got to look at iOS 6 as well as iOS 7.
Yeah, I think the big difference, I don't think anything changes for the iPad. I think the iPad 2 still gets iOS 7 because it's analogous. The iPad mini is basically a branch of the iPad 2, and they're going to bring both of those up. The big difference is on the iPhone, where the iPhone 3GS, which was up until September of last year, the free was still on the market, and the free phone from Apple, which sold in considerable quantities, is going to drop off, and it's not going to be able to update to iOS 7. The iPhone 4 will be the baseline for that. And like you said, it's not an insignificant amount of customers, and it is a real quandary because one of the biggest criticisms of Microsoft over the years is their inability to let go of backwards compatibility, hamstringing their ability to move their entire operating system forward. And maybe they're on the wrong end of one extreme, and Apple has been relentless, almost fearless about pushing forward and abandoning compatibility for OS X Classic, or sorry, for Classic mode, and then for PowerPC and different versions of iOS, and maybe they're accelerating too far on the other extreme.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you see. You see Windows XP devices still getting used, and you wonder what the hell people's problems is. Sometimes it's just complete inertia on the part of their IT departments, or a complete inability to afford a new machine in the case of a home computer. But as I cautioned at the outset, I don't want Apple to stop innovating, and I don't want developers to stop innovating. But it'll be really interesting as a social experiment to see, let's say, 6 months. After iOS 7 comes, hopefully Apple will be forthcoming with numbers, and we'll get a sense of how many people have jumped on board with upgrades or with new devices that are running iOS 7.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's also like some people listening to this, and some people just like their immediate thing will be, well, who's not going to buy a new phone? The 3GS has been off the market forever. You're crazy. But it's not always primary or first owners that have these phones. Quite often, we'll get the latest iPhone and we'll pass it down. We'll give them to our children. People who are on the iPad 4 might have given the iPad 1 to their child.
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah, I did the same thing, and my family is lucky because I buy so many devices. I think the oldest one in circulation now is a 4S and an iPad 2, and the iPad 1 and the 3GSs are kind of sitting on a shelf somewhere. But in a lot of families, those are still primary devices for a child, for a parent, for a sibling, for somebody, and they're going to be the ones who get left behind. And that money, that upgrade money, has been spent, just not on them.
Yeah, I mean, I've run into that situation in my own household. My two of my kids have iPad 1s. One has an iPad 2 that he got as a hand-me-down when we upgraded his mom. They can't run the latest version of iOS. They can't run iOS 6. They can't run a lot of the apps, a lot of the games specifically that they want to. And as a result, they've stopped using the iOS devices by and large and put them aside for other forms of entertainment. Or they've used the iOS devices, but in ways that aren't consistent with getting the latest apps and games. Like, okay, Netflix still works, so I can watch Netflix on it and, catch up with my cartoons that I like. They'll do that, but they don't necessarily use the latest and greatest apps. So, it's an issue. And that trickle-down thing, I think, affects a lot of families. It'll be interesting to see how it's managed going forward.
Yeah, I took an old iPod Touch and one of Apple's audio-video cables, because my mother still has a CRT television, because, for her, it's not broken. Why get an LCD TV? And the Apple TV doesn't work with that. So I took an iPod Touch, put it with the audio-video cable, ran Air Video on it, and that's her sort of makeshift Apple TV. So there are things that they can do aside from being primary computing appliances, but the other side of this, which I wanted to cover too, is that Hockenberry's partner, Gideon Mayhew, also from the Icon Factory, wrote his own blog post that was interesting, and he's a designer, and they're spending a ton of time updating Twitterrific for iOS 7. Now, Twitterrific is already one of the most modern-looking iOS apps, gorgeous app designed by David Lanham, also from the Icon Factory, and they're still making an iOS 7 version, and Ged pointed out that a couple of years ago, they all had to adapt for Retina. Last year they had to adapt for the 4-inch screen. This year is the biggest update ever, because if they really want to look like iOS 7, they have to add all those characteristics that make iOS 7 look like it, and that is not insignificant. And that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money for developers. Yet you can see in the comments on iMore, it's heartbreaking. Nobody feels like they should have to pay for a design update. Everyone feels that developers should deliver iOS 7 versions of their apps for free, and the developers needs to eat and feed their families on one side, and people's opinions that design is not a feature that I'm going to pay for on the others, there's sort of no meeting in the middle for that.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily take the comments of people on public discussion forums on websites or even on Twitter as a statistically valid sample of what is going to happen in the real world. It's an interesting, it's an interesting precursor. But it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation between what's actually going to happen when new products hit. I think that a certain segment of customers is going to be willing to pay for those upgrades. I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of vocal people who don't like it and are going to complain about it bitterly. But look, you've got to pay for you got to pay for new design just like you got to pay for new features. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, and everything comes at a price. I think part of the problem here is that Apple's way of managing updates in the App Store and in the Mac App Store is so bass-ackwards when it comes to not being able to charge upgrade fees. It's really kind of ridiculous. And also, I think that a certain segment of customers who are complaining about this really don't understand, appreciate, or necessarily even care the amount of work that goes into re-engineering an application with a completely new design language, completely new user experience language.
And in a lot of your case in point, they're having to choose because it's going to be really ugly to try to support iOS 6 previous and iOS 7 in the same binary because they use an entirely different set of assets and behaviors. So that would lead to either a really fat binary, or what I think a lot of developers are going to do, and probably what we're going to do with the iMore app, is release another version of the app. So you'll have the old version for older devices, you'll have the new version, and the new one is going to be the one that carries forward. But at the same time, to put their efforts into the redesign and the new behaviors, the physics, and all of that, they're not going to have time to do new features, which is something that people traditionally do pay for. So if new feature in the app was going to be whiz bang wow, and people would run to give them money for it, that's now going to wait, and they're going to do something that people don't necessarily think they have to pay for. And to your point about the App Store, it's a very different psychology. I made the argument last week that a lot of people think Apple has destroyed upgrade pricing with the App Store because they do not offer it. But to me, they've sort of destroyed retail pricing, and they made it's like Walmart, everyday low pricing. So before it would cost you, $1,200 or $1,300 for Final Cut Pro Studio or for Logic Pro. Now it's $299 or $199. When a new version comes out, $299 and $199. You're always paying upgrade price, but the cost of that is psychological. Previously, people would get a new version, it'd be at a hefty discount, and they're like, oh, I'm saving money by upgrading, and now it's the same price it always is, and they're like, oh, damn it, I'm paying again.
Yeah, no, it's true. We saw the sea change happen when the App Store first came out. People were initially, developers were trying to charge the same amount for products on the App Store, or maybe at a slight discount compared to what the actual box copies of their apps would cost, on the Mac or on other platforms if they weren't Mac developers initially. And that pretty much changed. That changed very quickly, as people realized that they could developers realized that they could game Apple's top-selling apps lists, by lowering the price of their apps to drive more people to buy it and so on. It's a very real issue, and I think that iOS developers are having a harder time differentiating their problems or their products and getting people to notice their products as time goes on and as the App Store gets more and more crowded. I mean, really, it started out where the App Store was, kind of like going to Costco or BJ's, or Sam's Club. You would just walk into this giant warehouse and see things that you wanted. And that experience hasn't fundamentally changed. Sure, Apple's got editorial staffs now that troll the sites all the time and look at the new content that's going up and feature a lot of content and find new and interesting ways to get it in front of people with different curated lists and so on. That's helpful, I guess, but in the end, I don't necessarily think that it's a solvable problem. You've just got a huge amount of noise, and it's difficult to get signal through that noise sometimes.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's changing too, because you and I come from a generation where there were upgrades. I mean, that's just the way software was. We went to the store, we bought it. came in a box. We came home. We installed it. I've been using Photoshop, I think, since version 3 or something. And every couple of years, I never bought every version, but I'd buy every second version. I would get upgrade pricing on it, and I justify it to myself, and I put it on. But my little godchildren, who are 4 and 7 years old, they have never known from upgrade pricing. All they know is that some of these apps are expensive, some of them not expensive, some of them cost money. You can buy stuff inside the app, but these kids are going to grow up the same way they're multi-touch native. They're just going to be App Store native, and that's going to be how they get software, and that's going to be what their expectations are for pricing on software.
Yeah, no, I'm inclined to agree. I was actually talking about this on the Mac Jury last night, which I guess will probably go up sometime early next week. But we were talking about how different it is now for millennials and younger really to consume entertainment on television than it was when we were younger, or that many people our age still do, which is sit there with a clicker and find something that you want to watch and then watch it. I've only got an abstract idea of what the TV schedule is because I've told my DVR to record everything that I want to record, and I just watch it when I've got the time. My kids are in kind of the same boat. They expect on-demand content, and I can see that in the way that they use their iPads as well, because their iPads have become their go-to devices for on-demand content, whether it's through HBO Go, or other applications that serve it up. So, we're seeing this. I think this fundamental societal change in the way that people use entertainment, and I don't see us shifting back to the old way anytime soon. However, there's still this huge population of people, in their 40s, 50s, and higher, who are accustomed to getting content the old way, and that's why, there's this monolithic entertainment superstructure that affects the way that we can get this stuff. We've got the Universals and the Warner Brothers and the Comcasts and Time Warners and so on, managing the way that we can get all this stuff, ingest all this stuff, and that's not going to go away for a generation or two.
I'm laughing because I was talking about this the other day with a friend of mine that. When I was younger, I would have either VHS tapes or DVDs, and I would look at them and see, oh, there's nothing to watch. I don't want to watch this again, and just not find something I'd like. Then I'd sit down in front of the TV, and on network television, there'd be a movie or something that I had the DVD or the VHS for, thought was boring, but yet would watch just because it was on television, even though it had commercials. For some reason, I would just settle for doing that. And now you flash forward, my godkids go to their grandmother's house, who still has regular commercial television. They don't understand why they can't watch the show that they're used to watching because they have an Xbox Media Center at home. They don't understand why there's commercials interrupting them. And I saw Christina Warren from Mashable yesterday tweet that she rented a movie off of iTunes because she was too lazy to go to the other room and get the DVD off the shelf. And I can totally identify with that. And just the shift in how we consume this stuff, whether it's apps or media, is kind of staggering when you look at it, and especially the divide between millennials, which to me sounds like a superhero team name. It's pretty awesome.
That's right.
Fighting
The millennials.
kaiju or something, and whatever generation we are, the Xers to the baby boomers, there's like this. It's almost like seeing the where the Indian Ocean meets the Atlantic Ocean. There's like a line right in the middle.
Yeah, exactly, in a big vortex. It is really interesting, and I think that it speaks volumes about the way that technology has changed things. And I think that a lot of people are kind of hoping that Apple would be disruptive in this sense, right? With Gene Munster's endless ruminations on the Apple television, and the idea that Apple, with the Apple TV or with something else, was going to reinvent the way that we consume entertainment. But I don't necessarily want to reinvent the way that I consume entertainment. I look at my monthly budget. I have a pretty big chunk of my income set aside for entertainment when I consider just my cable bill alone. And okay, my cable bill combines, telephone, cable television, and cable modem. And the latter two especially are indispensable to me when it comes to entertainment media, right? Because I'm either streaming content from various sites like Netflix, or I'm watching TV shows. But being able to watch on-demand content rather than having to watch it when it's televised is a huge deal. I'll never forget. We got a DVR early. We were early adopters in our neighborhood, and when my daughter was really young, I had this experience where I walked in the living room and she was crying and just pounding on the remote control, and I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, I can't fast forward through the ads. It just had not occurred to her that she was watching live television, and thought this was a recorded program and I should be able to fast forward through the ads. And I had to kind of talk her in off the ledge and explain to her what was going on. That's just the expectation now, I think, that you should be able to get any content that you want whenever you do it. That's also, I think, one of the reasons why people are provoked to write blog posts about how angry they are at HBO for, not having the latest season of Game of Thrones available for download through the iTunes store, and how they're just going to rip it, or they're just going to BitTorrent it instead. This sort of
entertainment entitlement.
Entertainment entitlement, that's exactly right. Well, hey, look, I understand that I'm not going to be paying a la carte for this stuff anytime soon, and I really don't want to think too hard about how much of my cable bill is subsidizing the 40 cooking channels and
the fake shark documentaries on Discovery.
Right, the Megalodon stories and the 250 sports networks I don't watch. Because if it's not Bruins or Patriots, I don't care.
I don't know what a Bruin is, sorry.
Yeah. So, but look, it is what it is, and I think it's the nature of what we're doing. And like I said, I just don't see that a la carte option being open to us anytime in the near future, as long as these big media companies kind of hold the reins of it in their hand.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I cut the cable cord 2-3 years ago just because I just never had time to watch things live. I had so much stuff on my DVR; it was perpetually full. And then Netflix came along, and the thing I love about it is that sort of dream where I could watch something on my iPad. If I'm on my Apple TV, I'm there. I'm watching my Apple TV. If I need to change rooms or it's night and I'm tired, I go to my room. I can keep watching it on the iPad. I can watch it on my iPhone if I'm not home but still have a decent connection. And that sort of persistency and constant availability, I think, is that model. But like I've said before, it's going to take an extinction-level event before all the HBOs and other entertainment companies come around. And I mean, on iTunes now they have early access stuff where you can pay a little bit more to watch things that are, they're fringe movies, but you can watch them while they're still in the movie theater. And there's that ridiculous thing that scans your iris, and for $5,000 you can watch a real Hollywood movie on your $40,000 box at home. So it's moving. It's just moving really slowly.
Yeah, exactly. It's not moving as quickly as we wanted, and we don't have flying cars either, or moving sidewalks. A lot of things that we were promised, as the wave of the future, haven't turned out the way that we wanted for various reasons.
Actually, spoiler alert, yesterday I recorded the next episode of Vector, which is going to be up next week with Tim Stevens, all about the future of cars, and he is super gadgety car smart.
That should be a very cool episode.
Yeah, he's awesome. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, just in general, was this whole idea of security. We had that, the last Talk Mobile Week was about security, and it's been a bit of a brouhaha again. I just wanted to make a quick comment on that. The internet was outraged to find out that Chrome, the desktop browser, does not encrypt your password. That's not the right way of phrasing it. If you have physical access to someone's machine and are logged into it and Chrome is running, if you know the right URL to go to, you can click a button and see plain text versions of their password. This is by no means new. It's been like this as far back as I can remember, but someone I think on The Guardian saw it, got very there was a blogger who saw it, wrote an article, got a lot of attention, and it caused a bit of an uproar. Google's philosophy is that there's no real way to secure that. If we put a master password on, it's BS, because anyone who knows how can just get to the root file anyway. So we'd rather you not have a false perception of security. The other point of view is, well, I just want to stop, my snooping sister or the guy at work from looking at my stuff, and a master password would absolutely do that. So why not give it to me? My whole thing with this, and I'm curious how you feel, is I would never, ever, not ever store a password in a browser because they're not secure, and that's why we have all these fantastic password manager apps.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the big question that a lot of people I've heard about regarding Mavericks have about iCloud Keychain. Like, how secure is putting this stuff in the cloud, and that's a message that Apple should really try to confront at some point or another if it expects people to use this technology. I think that I'm in the same boat that you are, Rene. Unless I have a reasonable sense of security about the way that my credentials are being stored, I'm not going to use a medium to store it. This was the biggest non-story of the week, in my opinion, because, as you pointed out, this has been known for a long time with Chrome. It was only when it got republicized, when whoever was sort of ground zero for this got rolling, and
your big sister can see your passwords.
Right. And they kind of ran with it. So whatever.
Yeah, you raise a good point about iCloud Keychain. Like, as of right now, I will not be using it for the simple fact is I don't know enough about how it's going to work yet. I use 1Password. You can also use LastPass. There's all sorts of password managers, mSecure. But with that, I put in a master password when I want to access my passwords. They are locked otherwise, and I can lock them independently. If I just put in my PIN code for my iPhone and then give it to somebody or lend it to them, and all my passwords are suddenly available, to me that's not secure. And Apple hasn't really shown that they have their own master password or other sort of independent authentication system. So to me, that would just be a non-starter.
Right, exactly. It's God, yeah. Yeah, actually, I don't have anything else to add. You're absolutely right.
Well, we're at Apple, so we put up a bunch of stuff. Ali showed you how to instantly lock your Mac. If by some chance you didn't know this and you did store all your passwords in Chrome, Ali showed you how to create an instant lock for your Mac, so that if you do leave the computer, you can make sure at least your system's password is in effect. We also put up a couple articles on how to use password managers. We put up a collection of tips on how to make yourself more secure, including using stronger passwords, how to keep stuff off your lock screen, because there's no point in having a password if notifications are popping up telling everybody your stuff anyway. How to turn on two-step verification, how to wipe out your browser history, your message history, your email history, whatever you need to wipe out. Also, how to make sure that you browse. Safari pioneered the whole private browsing thing, and social networks have various privacy modes, and also how to use a password manager. So if you're at all concerned about security, we have Nick Arnott, a fantastic security editor. Just go to imore.com/security, and we have pretty much everything that you need to know about keeping all your Apple stuff safe and secure right there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of two-step verification or two-step authentication because, the whole system is, based on something you have and something you know. So, I know my password, and I've got a cell phone in my hand, and if you can, send me that, or send me some kind of code that I can enter on my cell phone to let you know that I am who I am. That gives me a better sense of security. So I always go with two-step authentication whenever I can, and I recommend that anybody who's listening do the same, especially for really important stuff like their bank accounts, or any really sensitive information. If two-step authentication is an option, use it.
One of the things that's interesting with this is a lot of stuff also I'm trying to find out more about. For example, Twitter started a new form of two-step verification. They didn't want to use tokens, so what they basically do is create a device that holds your private key, and then when a new Twitter instance is started, it sends a query to that device, and if that gives you a pop-up, and you could say, yes, I'm the one doing it, and then it will send back your private key. But all this stuff is weird. I remember we got locked out of the Mobile Nation's YouTube account when we were in New York. I was with Kevin Michaluk, and Kevin's phone was the phone assigned to the token, but that phone was sitting in a drawer in Winnipeg because that's where that SIM card was, and no one was near it, so we were effectively locked out of YouTube. And a lot of us change devices a lot, or we have different things with us, and you have to be very... I remember I have... my Dropbox uses 1Password. So my 1Password uses Dropbox to store its database, but my Dropbox password is in 1Password. So I was setting up the new MacBook Air, and I had to go find another device and then type out the password, which I wasn't used to. So you have to make sure that you don't make things so secure. Like that video game, Peter. Remember when the key to the door was inside the locked room? True.
I, as a matter of fact, ran into that very issue with my bank when I went from a smartphone to a dumb phone. I actually, for whatever reason, in a fit of pique, decided not to port my number over. And sure enough, I got a new computer and tried to log into my account, and it's like, oh no, wait a minute, I got to verify this. And I didn't have my old phone anymore. I didn't have my old phone number, so I never got the message. And trying to straighten that out actually required a call to, the customer service number. And I guess if you're a really creative hacker and you really knew what you were doing, you could use social engineering at that point to convince the person that you had done exactly what I had done, and to try to get them to reset the authentication number that they used. But no system is foolproof. Look, if somebody is that interested in getting through whatever defense line you put up, they are going to do it. It's just a matter of time. And unfortunately, people are motivated to do it because there's money to be made there. Whether you're, some hacker in Russia that's creating botnets, or whether you're a Nigerian prince with $10 million, you're struggling to get out of the country under surreptitious means. Whatever, every system can be broken, and yeah, I mean, the one downside of two-step authentication is that if something goes wrong with the authentication system that you're using, you're done, you're cooked until you can figure something else out.
It's how we beat the master control program back in the 80s, Peter, and it's how we're going to beat it next time.
End of line.
So, sort of the last thing I want to talk to you about is what's going on in gaming this week. Is there anything that you're excited about? Anything you'd recommend?
We reported on this a couple of weeks ago, and I cannot say enough good things about Shadowrun Returns. If you haven't already checked this out on your Mac, or for that matter on your PC if you're not a Mac user, it is so freaking awesome. It's incredible. Shadowrun Returns is from a company called Harebrained Schemes. They actually used Kickstarter to raise the initial seed money to get this project off the ground, and it is the remake of, or not a remake, but a revisitation to a pen and paper RPG game that got started in the 80s. It's cyberpunk meets sorcery. It's very cool. It's all isometrically displayed, and it is my jam right now. I just can't get enough of it.
Nice. And on the app side, Ali just took a look at Trello, which is I don't know the right way to describe it, it's sort of a project management app, but it's used by a lot of my friends. They all recommended it highly, so Ali's taking a look at it. If you have a lot of projects you want to run, it's just a very interesting, very sensible, almost real-world way of looking at it and managing it. And I also wanted to mention 1Password is currently on 55% off, so if you haven't got it already, it's 1Password 4 for the iPhone. As the show will be up plenty of time for you to take advantage of that sale. And there's also something called Mixbit, which is by the guys who created YouTube, which is sort of a Vine and Instagram video competitor. Everyone is racing to be the sort of Harry Potter moving picture technology of the future, and I like the fact that there's several competitors in this space. I don't think anyone's nailed it yet, but I think eventually, Peter, we'll all be moving around to really creepy pictures on the walls.
Yeah, so it'll be kind of like the Harry Potter movies where the eyes will be following you around as you walk.
Yeah, that's our future. We're done.
I don't know that I'm really comfortable with that. I might have to just keep blank walls, or maybe pictures of velvet clowns or something.
Pictures of velvet clowns. We have our show title.
There we go.
Peter, where can we find you, and where can we find more of your work?
iMore.com and loopinsight.com, and every so often somewhere else too, or on Twitter and app.net at Flarg, Flargh.
I think you were also on your Bearded Halves podcast this week, Amplified, right?
That's right. I was on Amplified with Dan Benjamin, Hattie, and Jim. So yes, it was that was a really fun. That was a really fun jaunt. I hadn't been on Amplified before, and I don't think Jim is going to have me back anytime soon.
I've been in the middle of you and Jim on a podcast. I don't envy Dan or hate you at all. Great. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can also find me at iMore. You can find all of us at mobilenations.com/shows. We have Debug for developers, Iterate for designers, Vector for general tech stuff. We also have the Android Central show, Crackberry show, Windows Phone Central show. We have the Talk Mobile show, which resumes next week. We're talking all about the cloud. So if you've done this show, you're looking for the next thing to watch, don't turn to Netflix, don't go to HBO Go, go right to mobilenations.com, and you will find everything for your techie enthusiast entertainment. That's it. I'm done, Peter. I ran out of stuff to say.
All right.
Quarterback is toast.